Hola y bienvenidas a Sex and Spanglish, where we empower mujeres to get in touch with their bodies, own their pleasure, and where we discuss all the cochinadas our abuelas didn't tell us about. My name is Ana Lopez. I'm a sexpert, future doctora, certified sex and life coach, proud Latina, and your go-to guide for all things sex. I'm here to help you kick vergüenza to the curb and teach you to have guilt-free sexual pleasure. Basically, I'm here to help you have mind-blowing sex without the guilt and shame you learned to have growing up. Let's be real. La comunidad latina doesn't talk about sex, pero que suerte tienes because this Latina does. It is my vision to have Latinas worldwide discussing sex with one another just like they do with chisme. Así que prepárate, I'm about to change the way you view sex para siempre. There are only three things that you need in order to have mind-blowing sex on demand: an understanding of your body, the ability to effectively communicate that, and the skills of rest and rejuvenation. In last week's episode, I began diving into the skills of rest and rejuvenation. I provided you with the definitions of rest and rejuvenation, how I'm actually defining these terms in relation to sex and mind-blowing sex on demand. And I talked about why they are vital to having mind-blowing sex on demand. Because as I mentioned in last week's episode, is whenever I tell my clients that they need to build the skills of rest and rejuvenation in order to have mind-blowing sex on demand, they look at me like I have two heads. And the skills of rest and rejuvenation are arguably the most important. So if we think of the three things that are needed in order to have mind-blowing sex on demand, which is an understanding of your body, the ability to effectively communicate that, and the skills of rest and rejuvenation, the skills of rest and rejuvenation are actually the most important out of all three of these things. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, definitely go back and listen to that. I also want to point out, if you are listening to this episode, this is your first time here, first of all, welcome. But even if it's not your first time here and you haven't listened to the episodes on understanding your body and the ability to effectively communicate that, definitely go back and listen to these episodes. There are 2 on understanding your body and there are 3 on effective communication. And there's currently 1 in addition to this episode on the skills of rest and rejuvenation. And there's going to be 1 after this talking about rejuvenation specifically. So definitely go back and listen to those episodes after you listen to this one. So for today's episode, I'm going to be talking about rest specifically. And I want to revisit the definition before I get into it. So rest, by the dictionary's definition, is a bodily state characterized by minimal function and metabolic activities. It's also defined as a freedom from activity or labor. It is defined as a state of motionlessness or inactivity. It is defined as a peace of mind or spirit. So when I read that, what I think of is really like an extreme example of just vegging out, right? So you can think of just like chilling on the couch, maybe ordering DoorDash, right? You're just like watching TV, scrolling on your phone, right? You're not really doing anything. You can think of laying in a hammock and just listening to some music, or laying on the beach or poolside with a margarita, right? Just really chilling out, not really doing much of anything, right? That is the extreme version of rest, but for the purposes of this episode, that's what we're talking about. And I'm going to go into why that is in a minute or two. The analogy that I provided for rest, I shared this in last week's episode as well, but I always share this with my clients. When I think of rest, I like to think of it as like in terms of a car. So like if you were a car, you'd be turned off, not going anywhere. You're parked either in the driveway or on the street. Maybe you're, parked in the garage, like something like that, right? You're just turned off, chilling, not going anywhere. So rest at the extreme is doing nothing, right? The extreme example that I just mentioned, it's doing nothing. But rest actually doesn't have to be just doing nothing. Rest can actually be hanging out with friends, going on a hike or going on a walk, reading a book, going for a swim, right? So maybe it's actually like a lap swim, or maybe it's just like a fun swim, hanging out with your friends or, whatever. Honestly, rest can almost be pretty much anything. Rest isn't actually about the activity, which is oftentimes what people think of it as, right? It's like, oh, if I'm resting, I need to be like laying in a hammock or lounging around in the house or lying by a beach, right? It's very like, that's very stereotypical rest, but rest isn't actually about the activity in and of itself. It's about how you feel doing the activity and the energy level that you're at when you are doing the activity. So I'm going to say that again. Rest isn't about the activity itself. So it's not about hanging out with friends. It's not about going on a hike or a walk, reading a book, going for a swim. It's not about lying on the couch or lying by the beach or the pool. It isn't about the activity. It's about how you feel doing the activity and what energy level you're at when you are doing the activity. So in last week's episode, I said that the first step in learning how to rest, because most of you listening to this episode do not know how to rest, and that is okay. I said that the first episode is going to the extreme. And so you might be thinking, why do we want to go to the extreme with rest, right? So if rest isn't just, lying on the couch, vegging out, lying by the beach or by the pool or whatever, and rest can include, going on a hike or a walk or reading a book, like it can be pretty much anything. Why then, Anna, are we talking about the first step going to the extreme? Like, what is the purpose of that? And my answer to that is because most of you listening to this haven't built the skill of rest. You don't know how. You don't even know what it is really outside of this definition that I've provided. If I were to ask you, how do you rest? You likely wouldn't have an answer. And even if you did, and I said, okay, well, go ahead and do that thing that is restful for you, you rarely feel rested, which tells me that you haven't built the skill of rest. And that is okay. That's not problematic, right? It makes sense that you haven't built that skill. If you were socialized as a woman, and particularly if you were raised in a Latino household, specifically a traditional Latino household, where there are very stereotypical gender roles that were emphasized, you likely don't know how to rest. So it makes sense then that you haven't built this skill because you weren't given the opportunity to do so. And to drive my point home, I want to share an excerpt from my ebook, Just Don't Get Pregnant and Other Dichos, A Latina's Guide to Deconstructing Cultural Messages and Enjoying Sex Sin Vergüenza. I know that is a mouthful, but the ebook is called Just Don't Get Pregnant and Other Dichos, A Latina's Guide to Deconstructing Cultural Messages and Enjoying Sex Sin Vergüenza. I'm actually going to leave the link in the show notes so you can download that. It is a free download, an ebook that I've written for you all. So this is an excerpt from the dicho, pues ponte a limpiar. Pues ponte a limpiar. This notorious phrase is used by Latino parents when their kids say they're bored. And if we're being honest, this happens more with the girls. Hashtag, if you know, you know. Maybe you didn't hear this exact phrase, but you experienced the following scenario. Your home was clean, yet somehow there was always quehacer to do. Or maybe you have the experience of cleaning your room or the entire house before you even fixed your mouth to ask for permission to go anywhere. Let me read that sentence again. Or maybe you have the experience of cleaning your room or the entire house before you even fixed your mouth to ask for permission to go anywhere. You knew that if you didn't clean before you asked, you couldn't go, and cleaning was somehow going to improve your chances. Essentially, you had to earn the right or the privilege to hang out with your friends or have fun, aka relax. Clean houses are great, but spending all of your free time cleaning gives a child's malleable brain the impression that cleaning takes precedence over rest. As a result, many Latinas never built the skill of relaxation. Y para echar la sal, many of us feel anxious when we relax. My clients often say, I feel like I'm going to get in trouble if I just sit down and take 5 minutes for myself. I tell you this because I want you to know you're not the only one who feels this way, and that it isn't your fault you, quote unquote, can't relax. I also want to offer that you can relax. You just haven't learned how to just yet, and that's okay. So, what's sex got to do with it? There are only 3 things you need in order to have mind-blowing sex, and the ability to relax is one of them. The inability to relax can show up in a multitude of ways. Here's the most common way this shows up during sex. You wish that you could turn your mind off during sex, but you just can't. You find yourself thinking about everything but what's happening right in front of you. For some, this means having trouble becoming aroused or orgasming, low sex drives, anorgasmia, or the inability to orgasm, infrequent orgasms, and or vaginal dryness. Let me be clear. There are many reasons why women suffer from the aforementioned, but the inability to relax is the most common cause. And even though the inability to relax may not be the primary culprit, it is often exacerbating the issues. In other words, your low sex drive, for example, could be primarily caused by a medication you're on, but it's been driven even lower by your inability to relax. Okay, now what? Relaxing is a skill, which means you're not going to be able to do it overnight. You're going to have to build it like you would a muscle. Put yourself in a resistant state and then give yourself time to recover. You're probably thinking, what the fuck does that even mean? Don't worry, girl. I'm going to explain. Put yourself in a resistant state. You're going to essentially force yourself to relax no matter how uncomfortable it is. It is totally normal to feel uncomfortable at first, but the more you do it, the less uncomfortable it gets. Eventually, it will feel good. Start with 5 minutes per week. You can do it. Give yourself time to recover. It is going to be uncomfortable and likely anxiety-producing to put yourself in a resistant state. This is why we are going to give you time to recover. Outside of the 5 minutes per week, you're going to practice active meditation. And I recommend you do this while you're brushing your teeth because it's something you do every day, I hope. Although I recommend you doing it while you brush your teeth, you can do active meditation virtually anywhere and at any time. The only thing you have to do is pay close attention to your 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And you can find a video explanation of active meditation here. So that is the excerpt from the book, Just Don't Get Pregnant and Other Dichos, A Latina's Guide to Deconstructing Cultural Messages and Enjoying Sex Sin Vergüenza. Again, I will put that link to the free ebook in the show notes. And when I said that last line of you can find a video explanation of active meditation here, that was actually a TikTok video that I did. So I will put that link in the show notes as well, so you can go and watch that. I've also done a podcast episode on active meditation. So I will link that podcast in the show notes as well. So if you just wanted to listen to that in lieu of the TikTok video, or you wanted to listen to both are great. So that is why we want to go to the extreme with rest. It is super important to understand why you are starting where I'm suggesting that you start. We can definitely get you to a place where you are hanging out with friends and it's restful, or going on a hike or a walk, reading a book, like doing something other than just fucking laying there like toda, like starfish or whatever, like outside of sex, right? But even during sex. But we really want to start with this exaggerated level first, because that is the easiest part. And I know that sounds weird, right? It's like, no, when I do nothing, like I feel super anxious and panicky and like all of that. And I get it. I've been there. Sometimes I'm still there, right? But we need to start there first and then work our way back into resting and doing other things. Notice how that's like 2 things at once, whereas we are just learning to rest here. So this week, I want you to take 5 minutes where you sit and do absolutely nothing. This means not watching TV. This means not scrolling on your phone, not reading a book. I just want you to sit and do nothing. And I want you to pay close attention to the thoughts that come up and the feelings that you feel. Notice if you are feeling uncomfortable, anxious, whatever else. You might be feeling some other emotion, right? And that is okay. But I want you to pay close attention to those thoughts and feelings that you're having, and feel free to send me an email at anna@sexandspanglish.com or send me a DM on Instagram at sexandspanglish, and let me know what came up for you. Let me know that you listened to this episode and that you're trying to learn to build the skill of resting, and let me know what came up for you. If you have made it this far, this means that you have listened to the entire episode, assuming that you didn't skip any parts. So first and foremost, I want to thank you. It is truly an honor and a privilege to get to share my knowledge and expertise every single week, and the fact that people listen is mind-blowing to this day. So thank you. And before you go, I have a quick favor to ask of you. If you have gained anything from this podcast at all, if you learned one thing, if you've subscribed to the podcast, if you plan on coming back next week, if you have applied anything that I've taught you and it has brought you amazing results or even good results, right? Like if you've gotten results from what I've shared by applying what I've shared here in the podcast, I want to ask you to rate this podcast. I'm currently in the process of sharing the impact that this podcast has on the listeners, on the audience, on you all. And that means that I need to hear from you all. I know that people are listening because I see the subscriber number go up each and every week. I see the amount of time being listened to each episode. I see that go up every single week. So I know y'all are listening to entire episodes. I know y'all are listening to these episodes multiple times. I know people are subscribing. So the analytics say so, but I want to hear from you all. So if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review. So, give it a star rating and share 1 to 2 sentences about something that you've learned from the podcast, what you think listeners need to know. If you are on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment letting me know the impact that this episode has had on you. If you are listening on Spotify or some other platform, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram at sexandspanglish. You can also send me an email, anna@sexandspanglish.com, and let me know what is resonating for you. What did you take from this podcast and apply to your own life where you've gotten results? Tell me what you like. Also, tell me what you don't like and provide me with suggestions for topics and questions that you might have. I also want to remind you that I do have an anonymous question box. So feel free to go to the show notes and submit your questions there, and I may share them on the podcast anonymously. Of course, all of that is in the show notes. But again, thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. And if there has been anything that you've learned from this episode, please, please, please do me the favor and let me know, whether it be through Apple review, whether it be through DM, whether it be on your stories and sharing like a little snippet and tagging me in it, whether it be a comment on YouTube. I just ask that you share what your thoughts are on this podcast. I'll talk to you next week.